What is Bitcoin? How does it work? Why is it even worth anything at all? We're going to explore all of that. I'm the Bitcoin Guide, and this is Bitcoin Basics Episode 1, where I'm going to be explaining Bitcoin in a way anyone can understand, one episode at a time. In order to truly understand Bitcoin, we first have to ask the question, what is Bitcoin? Many people will tell you Bitcoin is just an investment, something you buy, sell for more, and make some money along the way. But I'm here to tell you they're wrong. Bitcoin is quite simply the best money humanity has ever known. But in order to understand why, you first need to understand what money actually is. Money is just the most saleable commodity in society. Think about life without money. I've got firewood, you've got apples. We can only trade with each other if we want what the other person has at the exact same time. Economists call this the coincidence of wants. It makes trade slow, clunky, and often impossible. In the absence of that coincidence of wants, I'd have to go and find someone who has the goods that you want, say something like bread. I'd have to take my firewood, exchange it with the bread maker for some bread, then take the bread back to you and exchange it for those apples. The way out of this trap is the emergence of a highly saleable commodity, a good that people accept not to consume it, but because they know others will accept it later on in exchange for other goods. Certain commodities have properties that make them better suited for that role than others. Over time, one commodity becomes the most widely accepted, and that becomes money. This is exactly how gold became money. Over time, it grew to become the most widely accepted commodity in society because it had certain properties, and everyone recognized that it would be accepted by others in exchange for goods. Now, there is another way to understand money, which is as a ledger of obligations for society. Imagine it's harvest season. I want 5 apples, but the farmer doesn't need my firewood right now. He still gives me the apples, and we make a note, formally or informally, that I owe him the value of 5 apples at some point in the future. That's a ledger. My balance is recorded even though we didn't actually physically exchange the goods there and then. But for a ledger to work, the unit of measurement being used must be stable. Let's say bread is that unit of measurement. It's what's being used as money. The farmer credits me an amount of apples that is equivalent to, say, 5 loaves of bread. But then a baker in the town builds a bigger bread oven and he manages to double the supply of bread. My debt on that ledger is now worth a lot less than it really should have been. The 5 loaves of bread aren't as valuable now as they were before. The ledger balances on paper, but trust breaks down because one side loses out. Now imagine one society uses bread whilst another uses cattle. They both operate on different units, which means exchange rates constantly fluctuate and long-term trade becomes impossible to plan. When a small group controls supply, like the cattle farmers or the bread bakers, they essentially control the ledger of society. And that destroys trust because everyone's wealth is now at their mercy. So what makes something a good money and allows for a reliable ledger? For something to serve reliably as money, it must be durable, portable, divisible, recognisable, and most importantly, it must be scarce. And for a ledger to function reliably, it must be consistent across society, resistant to manipulation, and trusted to measure value fairly. If any of these properties fail, the system eventually breaks down, and history proves it. On Yap Island, people used giant limestone discs called rye stones for money and ledger. They could only be obtained by quarrying them from neighbouring islands, which was an extremely difficult and dangerous task, making them very valuable. So, they were rare and valued by everyone, but very difficult to move. So ownership and changes in ownership were recorded by public consensus. A change in ownership of a rye stone would be announced to the community and they would then accept and acknowledge the change. A kind of oral, verbal ledger based on community trust. It worked until outsiders with better tools and better boats started quarrying the stones for themselves and shipping them over in mass volumes. Scarcity collapsed. The ledger worked socially, but the value was gone. The money was compromised. And it allowed the outsiders to exploit the labour of the island's inhabitants using their newly quarried rye stones. In parts of Africa, beads were used as money for a long time. They were portable, divisible, and scarce. The people would wear them as jewellery, which acted as a kind of visible ledger, and their scarcity in the region gave them value. But Europeans soon realised the monetary premium on these beads. They managed to create tons and tons of beads using their superior glass-blowing technology, and they flooded the supply. Scarcity broke, purchasing power was destroyed, and this allowed for exploitation that led eventually to the African slave trade. Desperate people started to trade human lives in return for worthless beads. This is one of the scariest examples of what can happen to a society when the money and the ledger get corrupted. Gold solved many of these problems for centuries. It was durable, scarce, recognisable, and universally valued. Most importantly, it was difficult and costly to create more of. This made it the best form of money humanity had ever had. But gold had its limits. It's heavy and expensive to move, hard to divide for everyday use. And as global trade sped up due to technological advancements, gold couldn't keep pace. It remained unmatched in scarcity and durability, but impractical for modern commerce. Its lack of portability and easy divisibility eventually led to its failure, as societies turned to paper claims on gold instead. Enter today's fiat currencies, initially created as paper claims on gold. They solved the issues of portability and divisibility perfectly. Money can now move quickly across the globe in any amount. But soon, that link to the underlying gold was broken. There were more paper claims being created than there was gold underneath to back it all up. Despite that, governments were still able to force people to accept and use them through law, which is where the term fiat currencies actually comes from. Once this stage was reached though, despite all the conveniences they offered, fiat currencies failed on the most important property of all, scarcity. Governments could now create unlimited supply of money at will, and they did. And that has made society's ledger unreliable. People's savings will always lose value and debts will always be worth less in the future. Fiat currencies look like perfect money, but in reality, they allow central authorities to manipulate the ledger for their gain at the expense of everyone else. This is where Bitcoin changes everything. It fuses both functions of money into one through engineering genius, the best commodity and the most reliable ledger. On the commodity side, Bitcoin is durable, it is divisible down to 100 millionth of a coin called a Satoshi. It's highly portable, you can send it around the world in minutes. It's recognizable and fungible, and most importantly of all, it is absolutely scarce. There will only ever be 21 million coins. On the ledger side, Bitcoin is reliable and consistent, resistant to manipulation, and distributed across the globe. The Bitcoin network is made up of tens of thousands of computers all around the world, each holding their own copy of the ledger. Every transaction, every balance, every fraction of a coin. Any updates to that ledger or transactions are broadcasted to all the nodes in the network who check it against the consensus rules. Have the coins already been spent? Is the transaction valid? Does it breach the supply cap of 21 million? Only if a transaction complies with all of those rules will it get added to each node's copy of the ledger. That keeps every copy in sync, decentralised, global, and incorruptible. And here's the genius. Those consensus rules cannot be changed unilaterally. Not by governments, not by corporations, not even by Bitcoin's creator. The only way they change is if nodes voluntarily adopt new rules. That means no one can inflate the supply, no one can seize control, and no one can bend the ledger to their favour. And when you compare Bitcoin to those historical monies we looked at earlier, its strength becomes obvious. With the rhinestones on Yap Island, ownership changes were announced publicly and consensus was oral. It worked locally, but once outsiders could quarry new stones more cheaply, the scarcity broke. Bitcoin also relies on consensus, but cryptographic, global, and without the need for trust. Nobody can suddenly create new units and dilute the supply. The beads in Africa, perfectly portable and divisible, but once the Europeans mass-produced them, the scarcity collapsed. Bitcoin, just like the beads, is portable and divisible, but its scarcity is assured. No one can manufacture more of it. Gold, durable and scarce for centuries, but heavy, slow to move and hard to divide. It couldn't keep pace with modern commerce. Bitcoin is scarcer than gold, capped at 21 million, divisible down to one Satoshi, and instantly portable anywhere in the world. Fiat, like dollars and pounds that we use today, perfectly portable and divisible, but abandoned scarcity entirely. Bitcoin gives you the same convenience, but nobody can print more of it. So what we see is that Bitcoin unites both functions of money. It is the hardest, most saleable commodity ever created, and it is the most reliable, incorruptible ledger that humanity has ever known. It's the strength of these monetary properties and Bitcoin's credibility in enforcing them that give it its value and makes it the best form of money to ever exist. In the coming episodes, we'll look at how the nodes, the miners, and the difficulty adjustment all work together to keep Bitcoin secure, decentralized, and incorruptible. So if you found this helpful, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. I'm the Bitcoin Guide, and this has been Bitcoin Basics Episode 1.